Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the NCATS SBIR STTR webinar. This webinar, Securing Seed Funding, Support for Entrepreneurs and Researchers, is brought to you by NCATS as well as several of our partners. Before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping reminders. We will be accepting questions and comments. Please feel free to chat them to us throughout the webinar. You can do so on the right control panel. There is a question section, and you can always type there. We'll be answering them at the end of the presentation. We also have closed captioning and a recording this presentation, which we'll be sharing after this meeting. We'll send it to you in an email. If you would like to access closed captioning, please do. And if you have any technical difficulties, please also reach out to us via chat. So now we'd like to thank all of our partners. We have several here with us. We have Life Science Washington, Montana Bioscience Alliance, BioND, the Oregon Bioscience Association, and New Mexico Bio. Thank you to our collaborators. During this webinar, we're going to be talking about awareness about the SBIR and STTR programs at NCATS and supporting other small businesses to help foster innovation and technology development. We're going to help provide you tips that are going to support your small business organization as well as your research organization to be able to successfully apply and access NCATS resources. And our ultimate goal is to be able to increase the number of high-quality SBIR and STTR applicants, especially among geographically diverse states and women and minority-owned businesses. I do want to acknowledge that we have several bios from our idea states, and we thank you for joining us here today. We hope that you do consider applying for these programs. So during our meeting, we'll give you an overview of the program, provide tips for a successful application, share a case study, as well as offer some small business resources to help you. We'll also have a moderated Q&A. I would like to also ask you in advance, in addition to sending your questions via the chat, if you would just hang on for a minute or so after the webinar. There will be very, very few questions that will pop up. We really value your feedback and want to make sure that we are creating these meaningful events that are going to help you be successful in your application. With that, I'd like to introduce Lily Portilla, who is the Director of the SBIR and STTR programs and oversees strategic alliances here at NCATS. Lily, thank you.
Thanks, Monique, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the NCATS SBIR STTR webinar. NCATS is one of 27 institutes and centers here at the National Institutes of Health. It's actually the newest center. It was formed in late 2011. We conduct and support research on the science and operation of translational research and finding ways to cut through barriers that allow treatments to get to patients more quickly. And we focus on what is, one of our other goals is to focus on what is common across various diseases, and also, again, addressing potential barriers in the translational research process. And in terms of how we view translational sciences here at NCATS, we see this as a field of investigation that's focused on understanding the scientific and operational principles underlying each step of the translational process. And you'll get a sense of what we fund under the program once I go through the presentation and give you an idea of the types of topics that we focus on, but also other small business resources that we have here at NCATS. So I'll do a very quick funding overview on the SBIR and STTR program. And this is one of the largest sources of early stage capital funding in the United States. NIH as a whole has one of the largest programs amongst the federal agencies, and it does allow for U.S. Owned and operated small businesses to engage in R&D that have a strong potential for commercialization. So if you're used to programs at the NIH like the investigator-initiated R01 program, this is a different type of grant mechanism that, again, has an eye towards commercialization. We have various solicitations here at the NIH for the SBIR and STTR program. I think the most popular one is the omnibus solicitation, which has standard deadlines of September and the upcoming January 5th deadline. There is also another an April 5th deadline, but that will be covered under a new omnibus solicitation that will be out in the street come January of 2018. And these are investigator-initiated grant funding, but I will say that if you look at the solicitation, you will get a sense of the types of topics that each of the 27 NIH institutes and its sister agencies within the FDA and the CDC fund. We also have targeted solicitations as well too, so it's always good to go on the NIH website to see what other targeted solicitations exist. We have one here at the NCATS that I will be talking about as well too. And then once a year at the NIH, there is an SBIR contract solicitation that actually just closed in October. And typically the solicitation goes out in to August timeframe of every year. And again, not all institutes participate in the contract solicitation, but if you go to the current website and pull this up, you can get a sense of the types of topics that are funded across the NIH. So what is the SBIR and STTR program? So SBIR supports early stage research R&D projects at small businesses, and the STTR program helps small businesses formally collaborate with research institutions during the phase 1 and phase 2 of the program. And I want to clarify that when I say phase 1 and phase 2, I don't mean clinical trial phase 1 and phase 2. I mean phase 1 of SBIR and phase 2 of STTR, which I'll tell you about in a minute, what those are. SBIR and STT programs, again, I'm going to speak from the perspective of NCATS. It's on our mission, it's to transform translational science process so that new treatments and cures can be delivered to patients more efficiently. Our three main areas of interest are within drug discovery and development tools, biomedical and clinical health research informatics, and clinical dissemination and implementation research. And I'll also add clinical research management tools as well too. And again, I'll show you what those are in a few minutes. So SBIR and STTR are congressionally mandated programs, and they're set aside, which means that federal agencies must set aside a particular amount of their budget to provide funding for small businesses. This is 3.2 of the set aside of the NIH budget for the SBIR program, and for the STTR, it's 0.45%. So phase 1, usually when we use the term for SBIR and STTR, it's for feasibility studies, and the budget guidelines for SBIR are 100 and STTR are 150,000. However, the NIH does have a hard cap that can go up to $225,000. I will say that the best way to find out about budgets is to look at the omnibus solicitation, so you can see what each institute will pay up in this program. But I can speak for NCATS. We will support programs that go up to $225,000, and sometimes more depending on what topic areas they're in for a phase 1. For phase 2, the budget guidelines are 1 million, but again, NIH typically goes up to 1.5 million over a 2-year period of time. There's a mechanism called a fast track, which combines the phase 1 and phase 2. So when you apply, you're applying not only for the phase 1 funding, for the phase 2 funding. Contingent upon you meeting the phase 1 goals, you will get the funding for the phase 2 grant, part of the grant. We also have a program that's on a bit of a hiatus right now, which is the phase 2, phase 2B is something that we do fund currently right now. Not all institutes participate in the phase 2B program, but NCATS does, with the caveat that we must have funded your phase 2 grant. And it's additional funding, but it's very dependent on our budget and also what it is that you want to accomplish under the phase 2. So the best advice I can give about for anybody who wishes to apply to us under a phase 2B is make sure you had a phase 2 award with us, but also talk to us before you submit that award to make sure that we can and are interested in funding it. And then the last part is the phase 3, which is the commercialization. If you go to agencies like the DoD, this is the part where they are basically buying the product that you commercialize. But here at NIH, we're not typically the customer, and this is where we would consider that the small business should think about what partnering, additional funding, and exit strategy they would have to graduate from the SBIR STTR program. And again, to give you a sense of what the budget here, the overall NIH budget is about, and this is, I believe, FY 2017 numbers. So the official NIH budget was $33 billion. Almost $1 billion of that it was set aside and again is mandated to be used for the SBIR and STTR program. So as you can see, that's a significant amount of money that again is set aside for the advancement of entrepreneurial ideas through companies that are funded by SBIR and STTR. So who is eligible for SBIR funding? So it's U.S. businesses must be formed here and managed out of the U.S. With 500 or fewer employees. The PIs, principal investigators, primary employment needs to be with the small business at the time of the award and during the entire duration of the project. So the company must be more than 50% U.S. owned by individuals and independently operated, or more than 50% owned and controlled by other business concerns that are 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals, or more than 50% owned by multiple venture capital operating companies, hedge funds, and private equity firms, or any combination of these. And these criteria for eligibility are given to us by the Small Business Administration. So these, across all federal agencies, this would be what constitutes eligibility for the SBIR program. For STTR funding, an established cooperative research and development effort needs to be delineated, which means that you have to be formally collaborating with a research institution within the U.S. 40% of the work can be done within the small business concern. A minimum of 30% is to be done by the university or nonprofit research organization, or what is also referred to as an FFRDC, which is a federally funded R&D center that some of these exist throughout the country. And then you must have a formalized intellectual property agreement that it demonstrates to us that you have the ability to use the IP that you need to use for the project, meaning if you're using IP that was developed at a university, we must know that at the time of award that there is a formalized agreement between the small business concern and the university. And the primary employment of the principal investigator, unlike the SBIR, can be either with the company or with the research institution. So I think one of the benefits of SBIR and STTR funding is that it is one of the largest funding sources of early stage life sciences in the country. I will say that this program on a whole has bipartisan support in Congress, and I can't think of too many things that have that these days, but this particular program does. It's pretty stable and predictable from the perspective that you have an idea of how much the set aside is based on the agency's budget for that year. IP rights are retained by the small business. It's not a loan, and it's non-dilutive capital for the small business concern. And I think one of the things that we keep hearing from our grantees is that since projects undergo this rigorous, NIH peer review process, it seems our companies have used that as a way of attracting further funding and collaborations, because they've gotten, this kind of scientific check from the check mark from the NIH talking about the program, their particular project, that it's gone through this very rigorous peer review process. So again, this chart is really good at understanding what the differences between the SBIR and STTR are. Now, regarding partnering requirements, SBIR, you can absolutely partner with a research institution, but the STTR requires that you partner with a nonprofit research institution, university, or college. Work requirements, you can outsource up to 33% of a phase 1 and up to 50% of a phase 2 under SBIR. For an STTR, the minimum that you can outsource is 40% for the small business and 30% for the research institution partner. And the PI has to have primary employment under an SBIR with the company, but with the STTR, they can either be employed by the research institution or the small business. But keep in mind that the award is always made to the small business. So again, these are the funding announcement numbers for the current omnibus solicitation for SBIR and STTR. The next due date is January 5th. And I would advise you, once you click on to the funding announcement, that you can read the program description or research topics guide to get a sense of what the NIH is, particularly the various institutes at the NIH are looking for. NCATS topics are there. And also you can get a sense of the funding limits for various grants that are for the SBIR and STTR that each institute has. And all this information is made available in that link within the funding announcement. Talking very briefly about the review, as I said, a critical part of the application process is going, aside from putting the application together, is going through the scientific peer review that we have here at the NIH. What does the score consist of? Well, I think it's these 5 very critical points, which have to do with significance. What problem are you trying to solve? What is the commercial potential of the technology? The second is the investigators, and the team you have formed to get the research done. Do they have the right type of expertise and credentials to get the project off ground and moving through the entire term of the grant? What is the innovation? Is it new cutting edge technology, or is it improvement on what the current practice is out there? What your approach will be in the research design and feasibility, And also, we need to know about the environment. What facilities and resources are you going to be utilizing to get the specific aims of the grant accomplished? The following human subjects protection, animal use, biohazards, and inclusion of women and minorities are not scored individually, but they will be looked at within the context of the review. So again, just to give you an idea of what the timelines are here. So let's say, use the example of submitting an application on January 5th, which is the upcoming deadline. You would expect review, the scientific peer review, to happen between the February and March timeframe. Then these applications must go through individual NIH Institute Council review, which and councils here will meet during the May and June timeline, and then an award date at the earliest that we could be making would be sometime in July. And that's if you, again, this is the timeline that it would follow if you were to submit in January, to give you an idea that we're talking about, you know, anywhere from, you know, 6 to 8 months in making an award for the program. So sometimes applicants come to us and they want to get a quick award because they need to get through some kind of important milestone, critical milestone in their research. I would say that SBIR's STTR is not that type of program where you can get quick turnaround and get, you know, a decision made within a few months. It's not that type of program. I think, again, the timelines at NIH range anywhere between 6 and 8 months, but keep in mind the benefits that you're getting from the program, which is that validation of your science through the scientific peer review and the non-dilutive capital, all those pluses that I mentioned. So I wanted to talk about some tips in terms of applying. One of the critical ones, which you'd be surprised, is that sometimes when we talk to applicants, they haven't even read or looked at the particular funding announcement that they would potentially be applying under. And I think it's really, my advice is to get to know your funding announcement really well, understand what the due dates are, what the review criteria, but more importantly, what that funding announcement is covering, and make sure that it's focusing and aligning with that. Here at NCATS, we wanted to make sure that it aligns with our areas of interest. If you want to see a sample application that scored really well, our colleagues at the NIAID, which is one of our sister institutes here at the NIH, has made a couple of applications available to the public, so you can click on this link and look and see what a successful application looks like. Also, one thing that people may not realize is that all funded NIH applications, whether they be SBIR or in any other program across the agency, can be, you can sort through them through using this database called NIH Reporter. My advice to first-time applicants is to get to know what NIH has already funded in a particular area that you have an interest in. So you can use this database, put in search criteria, and get a sense of, for instance, what NCATS has funded in the past, the types of applications. And again, this is to help you find the right home and get an idea of what currently is in the pipeline at NIH getting funded in the SBIR STTR program. The other thing I'd like to say is make sure that you talk to your NIH program officer before you submit an application. It's very important to get a sense of, number one, do you fit with that particular institute or center that you're applying to? I know that this is something that here at NCATS we want to make sure that you are, that your application or project would be a good fit for us. And certainly do it at least a month before the due date. Things get kind of crazy here. And across the NIH, I will say a couple of weeks before application deadlines, you'd be surprised how many applicants wait till the very last minute to try to have a conversation like this. And unfortunately, we cannot get to everybody. So the sooner you have these conversations with your program officer, the better off you will be. And at least speaking for NCATS, when you would like to share what it is you're going to be doing in order to make our conversation time more effective, we also ask for a non-confidential abstract, or if you want to share a draft specific aims page with us, we'd love to look at that before we have a conversation, again, to help us guide you to make sure that it's a good fit, your idea is a good fit for NCATS, and if it's not, we will guide you to the proper institute that would be a good fit. One other thing we'd like to say is to make sure that you register early for all the SBIR, STTR electronic submission process. There's several registrations that need to happen. Some of those registrations can take up to 8 to 6 weeks to get completed. So again, make sure that you do this early on in the process so that you can submit a good application. Make sure that when you convert your application to a PDF that the pagination doesn't get messed up, because the applications will get kicked out of the system if they go over the certain page limits. One of the best tools that NIH has for folks applying to the SBIR, STTR is the NIH Assist program. It walks you through the application process. I encourage everyone, and more importantly, first-time applicants, to use this when submitting an application to the SBIR, STTR program at the NIH. You can also specify what institute and study section you would like to have your application as a primary assignment, but also for a study section, which study section you would like to potentially review the application. All the study sections are actually on the Center for Scientific Review website. You can look that up and you can see all the various study sections and what types of applications they review. And this can be done as part of your application process in making these suggestions as to where you'd want your application to go. And I can't stress this enough, submit early and make sure you allow yourself enough time to put your application together and get all your registrations done before you submit your application. I think the purpose of this slide is to basically tell you what we see as the common application problems across the NIH, and that may lead to the application not getting a good score or not getting scored. One is that the reviewers don't see any significance, or you didn't do a convincing case in expressing what the impact of that technology was, what the commercialization potential. Also, we see that the some applications inadequately define what they were going to test in this feasibility under the phase 1. The lack of innovation, research plans that kind of go in various directions. Reviewers like to see focus around the research plan, and also research that's commensurate with the budget limits that NIH has for this program. Also, failure to consider potential pitfalls and alternatives regarding the technology, being unfamiliar with relevant published work that's already out there. So do a PubMed search and go on that NIH reporter database that I told you about to get a sense of what's already out there and what's currently being funded. And this one is important. Unrealistically large amounts of work being proposed under the grant. We see this, I mean, in the desire of some applicants to basically show that they want to get the work done, they overdo what they're going to be doing in their research research plan, and then it's not commensurate with the budget of the grant, and this will get flagged by review. So other important facts to remember: eligibility is determined at the time of award. So if your intellectual property agreement that we talked about for an STTR doesn't need to be done at the time you submit your application, but certainly at the time of award, we would want to make sure that intellectual property agreement has been executed and everything is fine there. Another thing around the time of award is to make sure that we will recheck eligibility of the company to make sure that they're eligible to receive SBIR and STTR at the time of award as well too. The PI is not required to have an MD, PhD, or but we will be looking at the team you've assembled to make sure that they can meet the specific aims of the grant. So if you are planning on doing some kind of clinical research or animal studies, that you have the proper team assembled to get those studies done. Applications can be submitted to various agencies for similar, different agencies for similar work to support different aims and objectives. What we don't want to see is overlap. We want to see very distinct specific aims, but they can be for the same technology, just covering different phases of development. And awards may not be accepted from different agencies for duplicative projects, which is basically what I just said, sorry. Okay. Yes, so after review, this happens a lot too. A lot of our applicants get a bit discouraged after they go through the review process, only to find out that they did not get a very competitive score or that they were not reviewed by the review group. That does happen sometimes. But I can't stress enough that the summary statement that you get, every application here for the SBIR STTR program will get a written summary statement with the reviewer's comments, and that is possibly one of the most helpful guides to getting you to resubmit your application. It's a roadmap on how to improve the application based on what the reviewers' feelings were on those 5 criteria that I mentioned. And you know, please be open to these reviewers' remarks. And I know that you know, sometimes it can be somewhat personal to hear something that somebody doesn't think that's a great idea because it's your idea, but I can't stress enough that the summary statement is a great roadmap for improving your application. If you want to get a sense or a better understanding of what the process and the dynamics are of the NIH peer review system, go to the Center for Scientific Review, which is the link we have here to get us learn more about what that process entails, how study sections are put together. Again, I can't stress this enough. Spend time reading and revising your aims page based on what you get from that summary statement. Yes, I talked about this. Wanted to tell you that I talked about the various registrations that you're going to be needing to get your application submitted. There's 5 separate registrations that need to happen. You can go to this link to learn more, but the message here is to allow yourself a fair amount of time. As I said, some of these registrations can take 8 to 6 weeks, and one registration is dependent on the other one. So make sure that you follow the directions and the order in getting these done so that by the time you submit your application, you don't get any errors around the fact that you don't have the proper registrations in place. So I wanted to talk about one of our companies that we funded in the past. This is AI Cure. It's a company out of New York, and they were addressing the problem of medication adherence, and this is a problem that is seen also within folks that participate in clinical trials. So AI Cure came up with an artificial intelligence that would visually confirm that the patient was ingesting the medication. And this clinically validated platform works off of smartphones and tablets, and it makes sure that patients are adhering to taking their medication once they're participating in a clinical trial. And so AI ARCure received 2 SBIR awards from us, and they were able to leverage those awards and attract additional funding in $12 million from venture capital investors. They also established several strategic partnerships with various pharmaceutical companies who had an interest in making sure that patients were adhering to taking medication under clinical trials, so they were sponsoring. If you can imagine this, you know, the whole enterprise of putting a clinical trial together and making sure people are taking their medication is quite an expensive undertaking, and the pharma companies that participated and are now clients of ARCure thought that this technology really addressed a significant bottleneck that was out there, making sure that patients that participate in clinical trials are adhering to their taking their medication, and that this could be monitored by the person running the clinical trial. So I'm going to segue now to additional small business resources that we have here at NCATS. But before I do that, I wanted to mention that there were several entrepreneurial courses that are available to Phase 1 awardees at the NIH. One of them is the CAP program and the niche assessment program, which you can learn about by going to the NIH website. We also have one called I-Core, which is geared towards Phase 1 grantees, and they can participate in the training. And what NIH does is gives you basically a supplement to the grant to participate in the training. No cost to you. All you have to do is provide the time and the energy to participate in the training. There's also another training for the Coulter Foundation that focuses on medical devices that a couple of our sister institutes also participate in. And you can learn more about those on the NIH website. So NCATS has a couple of de-risking programs here that we have for small businesses and academics, and the first one is the Bridges program. This program, applicants enter when they have a clinical candidate identified. Any disease is eligible, but we exit. This is just to get you to an IND filing. So if there's a critical tox study or animal study that you need to get done, or perhaps you may need GMP grade material in order to get a a Phase 1 trial done, to get an IND filed, to get a Phase 1 trial done, we can help by providing you access to our CROs and internal expertise to get some of these clinical studies done. It's not funding, it's just access to resources. And this program is eligible for SBIR eligible businesses. If you're interested, you can learn more about it by going to our website. The other program that does about the same thing too is the Therapeutics for Rare and Neglected Diseases program. Now, this program does focus only on diseases that meet the FDA orphan designation or WHO neglected tropical disease criteria. This program does take you past IND, can get you up to a Phase 2A. It's milestone driven. Various modalities are taken, and you work very closely with our project managers and drug development teams here at NCATS to get access to these resources that we have here. And this, again, is also eligible to small businesses here in the U.S., but also foreign entities as well, because of the neglected tropical disease aspect of what we fund here, or what we support. So I'll give you a quick example of an applicant that, and what they did and how they use a couple of these resources here at NCATS, as well as an SBIR and STTR. So this particular applicant was an academic investigator who had developed this new molecular entity for a treatment of a rare disease. She had received a couple of R01 awards and an STTR, a couple of STTRs, which totaled about $3.5 million. But she went to the FDA and was told that she needed to get 2 preclinical tox studies done. And she was kind of stuck because, you know, these tox studies were not really typical things that you could get funding for under, you know, NIH grant programs. So, you know, she hit this valley of death that we've all heard about. So what she ended up doing was applying to the Bridges program. And the Bridges was able to support these 2 preclinical studies that were required by the FDA. They totaled about $500K. Once she did that, she was able to file her IND, and after that, she was able to raise about $50 million in venture capital Series A funding. So you can see that this program kind of gets you through this valley of death to get you to hopefully a successful partnership and more fundraising around your small business. So with that, I've concluded my presentation, and I want to thank everyone for listening, and we will entertain questions now.
Thank you, Lily. The first question is, can you explain what are the differences between applying for SBIR and STTR funding at NIH versus NSF?
So I think that the process may be a little bit different in terms of the forms that need to be put together, but I think the biggest difference between the 2 is the NIH peer review system and the fact that all SBIR and STTRs must go through that review process. And again, NIH being very much of a life science focused organization, the review is going to have that focus around with it. And as I've said, if you're working in this area of biomedical research, I think validation from the NIH does help in terms of further fundraising and development of strategic partnerships with your small business. So I would say that the review is probably the biggest difference.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you encourage applicants before they actually start working on the application to reach out to the program director of the institute. What do you mean by that? What should they share, and what is permissible to ask?
So if you can share a non-confidential abstract on what it is that you would like to propose to do under your SBIR or STTR grant, that would be great. Some applicants actually come to us with a draft specific aims page, and that's a great way of us making sure that it's a good fit for NCATS or any other institute here at the NIH. So those pieces of information are good conversation starters to determine whether the application would be a good fit for, especially here at NCATS. And I'll add that if at the time you have that conversation, if you could start exploring the NIH website and familiarize yourself with the various funding opportunities there, I think that also helps the conversation too.
Thank you. So we are getting questions about whether the slides will be available, and we do want to share that the slides will be posted on our website, and we'll also be sending out a thank you email with the slides and a link as well, so that you are queued to when those are on the website. So the next question is about how to approach all the setup and registrations that are needed. So should we build and submit applications using the ERA Assist program or via grants.gov workspaces?
I think for us, the Assist program is the one that we've been referring our potential applicants to go to. I'm not that familiar with the workspaces, with ERA Commons workspace. I'll add that I think if you go to the NIH website, it does kind of give you a guideline for the order of how to do the submission process. The other thing that's on the NIH website that not very many people know of is that there is an annotated application on there that you can pull, that you can get a sense of what are the required fields and what is the type of information that we're looking for. So that's also another really helpful guide as well too. And specific questions around how to, if you're having specific technical questions about submitting, please contact ERA Commons, because remember, I can't see how your dashboard looks like in ERA Commons. I don't have access to it. So our colleagues at ERA Commons are the ones that you need to troubleshoot with if you're having any issue.
The next question is about bridges, because you talked about additional resources available to applicants and how they can use them. Can you describe who is an appropriate candidate to apply to bridges? What are the typical due dates and what are the success rates of application?
Bridges, again, is not a grant program. It's access to resources and expertise. They look at applications in tranches. So they just went through closing an application. They had a significant amount of applications, so they have stopped accepting applications for now, but we would expect that to start back up sometime later in the year, and you would be notified of that if you go on the NCATS website and sign up for, our email notifications. Who is a good candidate? That's a great question, and I think the best piece of advice I can give anybody who's interested in that program is to have a pre-discussion, just like you would call me to submit, whether you were going to submit here for an SBIR. Talk to the Bridges people about what you have. They will be asking you for some data, what data you've collected thus far, the disease area, and where it is that you see that you need some assistance to getting you over this valley of death. And they will have that pre-application discussion with you at any time. If you go on the website, you can click the email there and then set up a time to discuss what you have and see if Bridges or Trend would be good fits for your particular issue.
Thank you. Lily, the question is about the deadlines. Are they the same across all NIH ICs? Those are the institutes and centers. And I know that some centers and institutes have specific applications or topics that they want to fund. So can you describe what those universal deadlines are and then why they may be different deadlines for other opportunities? Right.
So the omnibus solicitation, which I would say the majority of NIH applications come under have standard dates, which are January 5th, April 5th, and September 5th. Some specific funding announcements will follow those submission dates, but others do not. So the best piece of advice I could give you is, again, look at the funding announcement, look at what the due dates are, and because they may deviate from what the standard omnibus solicitations are, due dates are. But the omnibus solicitations may shift a day or two based on a particular holiday coming. I know that when there were weather problems in Houston, we extended the date for those applicants, but they had to prove that they were from the Houston area. So there's some latitude on the submission dates, but there has to be, a particular reason. So again, look at the funding announcements, and if you have any questions, talk to your program officer.
Thank you. The next question is easy. How can we stay in contact with you? I think we have a slide on that, and we will bring that up just so you can take note of that as we continue talking. The next question is IP required to apply for an SBIR or STTR grant?
No, IP is not required to submit an SBIR or STTR grant. However, I will say that, and maybe not so much for a phase 1, but certainly for a phase 2 grant, I think reviewers would like to get a sense of what your what intellectual property you have, or planning to file on, what you've filed on thus far, because by that time, during a phase 2 grant, you must also include a commercialization plan. And as part of that commercialization plan, you will be asked to talk about your technology and what intellectual property you have protected thus far.
Next question, can you apply for an SBIR phase 1 and subsequently apply for a STTR phase 2 if phase 1 is awarded?
Yes, you can do that. That is possible, to switch from SBIR to STTR and vice versa. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is there a limit on how many SBIR, STTR applications an applicant submit per cycle?
Yeah, there is, and there's some guidance on that on the NIH website. I know that it's more, the issue comes in more when these grants are awarded. There is a limitation on the amount that you can have awarded from a particular agency, and there is guidance on that from the NIH website. Could you submit multiple grants in an award cycle? Yes, so long as they are not, that they are separate and distinct aims that you're trying to cover, that there's no overlap, because we will and do have the ability to look across the various institutes here at the NIH and also agencies to make sure that there's no overlap in applications.
Very related question. You mentioned being able to submit to multiple centers for the same technology platform as long as there are different aims geared towards the direct objectives of the center. In that case, can the description of the underlying technology be used in all the applications?
Yeah, but again, what the people are going to be really focusing and concentrating on are the specific aims of the application, what it is that you're going to, you're proposing to do, and making sure that those aims don't overlap with another application. And
I think following this train of thought, some folks have asked if you submit to one IC and they decide may not be a perfect fit for their institute, do you all share among each other and the applications and kick it over?
That's a really good question. So if there's a primary assignment made for the application. So if you, as an example, you speak to me, we find out that your application is a great fit for NCATS, I'm going to ask you to make sure that in your application you say that you want NCATS as a primary institute. What you can also do is also mention secondary assignments. So if your application has a bit of an oncology focus, you could also list NCI, the National Cancer Institute, as your secondary assignment. So what happens in those instances? Well, sometimes you can, if another institute is willing to fund the application, if NCATS isn't, we can transfer the application and we can transfer it to one of the folks that are listed as a secondary assignment. Or the other thing that sometimes happens is that that secondary institute will help co-fund the application with the primary institute. There's a lot of that happens within the NIH as well too.
We're still receiving multiple questions. I did want to pause just to acknowledge our partners. We'll go to the next slide. Just so you have an understanding of their contact information as well. So the next question that I'm getting, and we'll move through the priorities and refresh on that, but they're saying that they don't seem to include medical devices and focus on drug discovery and commercialization. Are the medical devices supported by the STTR mechanism?
Yes, there are many institutes that I will say that for NCATS in particular, we don't focus that much on devices, but there are many institutes at the NIH that have particular high incidence of devices that they fund under the program. Cardiovascular type devices are funded under the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, for example. If you have bioimaging or bioengineering type technology, you can also talk to the NIBIB, which is the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Biomaterials, I think. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But again, you know, check out the omnibus solicitation, go to that program description guide that I talked to you guys about, and look there, because I'm pretty sure that if there's an idea in this space, it's listed in that guide, and you can find out who would be interested in funding it.
Thank you. So where can we find the program director's contact information? I do think that we talked a little bit about that, and want to make sure that we know that you can email ncats.SBIR@mail.nih.gov. There are real people who answer those emails, and they do so in a timely manner. Please plan ahead before the holidays, because sometimes we get a rush during the holiday season to get those deadlines met.
Yeah, and Monique, I'll add that in the omnibus solicitation that I just mentioned, if you go to that solicitation, it lists not only me representing NCATS, but all of the other 27 institutes and FDA and CDC representatives as well, too, and their contact information.
Thank you. Can you review the deadlines for the omnibus solicitation? There's some confusion as to whether you must submit by January and April is only a chance for resubmission. Can you just talk through those deadlines again?
Sure. So these are January 5th, April 5th, and September 5th are separate and distinct submission dates. So if you end up submitting the application is due date, the next one is January 5th, 5 p.m. your local time, that you have to have the application submitted to the NIH. If for some reason you don't score well and you wish to resubmit, you can do that. You will have the information to do that for the April submission date. If you go to the NIH website, there are some very helpful FAQs there that talk about the NIH resubmission process, the term for resubmitting an application. There must be something like 50 or more FAQs listed on there. That's another great resource that we have available to applicants that pretty much answers every question I think that I've come across in the program.
Thank you. So I know that NCATS has in the past had some targeted solicitations. Typically, when are those announced?
The targeted solicitations would be great if you could sign up for our listserv, because then you would be notified as to when they're released. But you can also go to our website under Small Business Resources and go to the funding page, and you can get a sense of the different individual funding announcements that we participate in and are leading. NCATS currently has one that we are leading, which is the tools and technologies around nucleic acid, and that's listed on the page. So if you go to the website, you can pull that up, and those due dates are actually consistent with the standard omnibus solicitations that I talked about.
Thank you. So can you please discuss a bit more about the fast track? Can a company who's ready go straight to fast track, and what will reviewers be looking for in those types of applicants?
So a fast track application, again, is one that combines the phase 1 and the phase 2. There is some expectation that you have some preliminary data to apply to the program. I would say the review bar is a bit higher than just going in for a straight phase 1 application, because, you know, we're making a commitment to not only fund the phase 1, but the phase 2. And so some data will be required. And again, we will give you the phase 2 funding only after you've completed all the specific aims that you have stated in the phase 1. So there was a mechanism that the NIH had that currently is not available, but may be in the very near future as soon as Congress reauthorizes this authority, which gave companies the ability to actually skip the phase 1 and go directly to a phase 2. It's called a direct to phase 2. That's another program that we're hoping that will get reauthorized. We're hoping that that's going to happen sometime in 2018, fingers crossed. And when it does, we will let the public know that that's happened. So that will be another way of engaging with the program. So it's a good way, if you have a lot of preliminary data that would allow you to skip that phase 1 and go directly to the phase 2, that's probably the best program. But like I said, not available yet. Fingers crossed that it will be in 2018.
Thank you, Lily. One last question. This relates to the being able to switch institutes. So if you apply for a phase 1 at one institute, can you apply for a phase 2 elsewhere?
Yeah, you can, but I really encourage you to talk to the program officers in not just the institute that you want to go to, but the one that you currently have your application. That happens, it happens some, and there has to be a good reason why. Maybe it wasn't a very good fit, or maybe you're actually going in a bit of a different direction that is more consistent with the other institute. So before you do that and make that request, make sure and you talk to both programs officers from the current institute where your application that you submitted to, but also the one that you wanted to go to make sure, again, that it's a good fit.
Thank you. We want to thank you for your time. We'd also want to thank our partners again. Thank you to Life Science Washington, New Mexico Biotechnology and Biomedical Association, the Oregon Bioscience Association, Bioscience Association of North Dakota, and Montana Bioscience Alliance. You see some of those contacts there. Please also take a few minutes to fill out the feedback form. And if we haven't answered your question and you want to talk more specifics about your project, please do email us at our NCATS email. Thank you for your time.